Welcome to the show. My name is Tuam. This show considers knowledge using a lens of political economy. What is political economy, you ask? Well, the big answer is that it is a branch of study that focuses on relationships between individuals, governments, and public policy. Then, it considers how these policies affect the nation's economy. The more simple definition of political economy considers ideas like the distribution of wealth, ownership of property, and issues of supply and demand. It essentially looks at all matters of development while keeping a keen eye on the politics of the day. For us to understand economic impact, therefore, it is necessary to apply rigorous analysis to information from the right source. Indeed, knowledge is only as powerful as its source. So, with that in mind, welcome to The Source.
Yo, 2M, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing great, JM. But before I say anything, I'd like to welcome everyone to our first episode of The Source.
That's right.
And I want to tell them that this will be the most authoritative political economic show. You know, they're used to watching economists, lawyers, journalists, and regurgitating politics and economic things out there. But we will be different. We will give them a glimpse of how political economists think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Now, you know, the other day we were having a conversation, just actually earlier this week, about Kenya's debt profile. So Kenyans on social media are an angry lot because of the IMF loan that it granted to Kenya of $2.3 billion.
Yes.
Now, in your view, why are Kenyans so mad?
You know, it is true, Kenyans are mad. Very mad. In fact, in my view, is that they are schizophrenic. And I'll tell you why. You know, do you know how much Kenyans borrow from Fuliza every single day? 1.3 billion shillings. Meaning in 1 year, they borrow 500 billion shillings. And also meaning that in just 180 days, they would have borrowed that $2.3 billion we are getting from the IMF. And yet, you see some people accusing government of borrowing. In any case, government is not borrowing for fun. For goodness sake, we are in a pandemic. The IMF has given budget support to 85 countries. 85 countries. South Africa received $4.3 billion. Nigeria received 3.4 emergency billion dollar loan. Egypt received a $2.7 billion loan. Ghana received a $1 billion loan. So why shouldn't Kenya receive a loan? In any case, you see, many of these Kenyans, they think the IMF is an NGO, that they can write a letter to the IMF and the IMF would listen to them. They think IMF is like Jamii Bora. IMF is made up of hardcore capitalists. They are seasoned economic hitmen. They take money from rich people and give it to emerging economies like ours. Of course, for some profit. And Kenya, don't forget, is a member of IMF. We have special drawing rights to their fund. So if we apply for a loan, it is normal for them to say, aha, member XXXX Kenya, your application is good. Your credit is in good standing. Here is $2.5 billion. Kusha. So Kenyans can go take a hike.
Well said.
Yeah.
It's good that you put it into perspective.
Absolutely.
Now, the other day, we were watching a documentary by Africa Uncensored on Kenya's debt. And they said some things that you vehemently disagreed with. But before you speak about that, allow us to watch a small part of that interview. And then you give us your thoughts on all of this.
Absolutely.
A lot of people say that the US has over 100% debt to GDP, Japan has the highest in the world, 200% GDP. But we forget that these countries, first of all, borrow in their own currency. The US will borrow in dollars and Japan will borrow in yen. So in the worst case scenario, they can really print their way out of that debt. From 2013 to 2019, we've seen our public debt go from almost 1.2 trillion to about 6 trillion.
So the whole economy is crumbling.
When government has no revenues to invest in the economy, it means that everyone is going to suffer, and most of the time, it's the young people and the vulnerable people in the economy who will suffer most.
Is Kenya on the verge of a debt distress? What is the implication of that moving forward? Africa Uncensored digs deep into these questions, seeking answers and highlighting how the appetite for foreign debt-financed infrastructure has devastated various sectors in the country.
So what do you think?
First, that's a joke of a documentary by Africa Uncensored. I actually feel that Kenya's debt is being looked at by the wrong people. Accountants, economists, journalists should consult political economists more if they want to speak about debt. And I say this because after I was done watching it, I asked myself, so what? You know, the question, so what? And that's a question a political economist would ask themselves, you know, when looking at data. But more importantly, I felt that the media in this country is churning out a lot of half-baked theories and passing them off as facts. I mean, it's a good thing having facts, but it's also imperative to let the facts tell a story. If your facts don't tell a story, then the facts mean nothing.
That's right. And so if the documentary then didn't tell a story, what story do you think should have been told?
Jonathan, for me it's simple. For me, Uhuru's story is real, roots and thoughts. And if this is Uhuru's story, it has to be backed by heavy investment. You've got to talk money, you've got to talk cash. And if you don't have the money, then you borrow. See, when Kibaki left office, Kenya's total debt profile was about what? About 2.2 trillion shillings. Budget was about 1.4 trillion. Our GDP was about $50 billion. 8 years later, Uhuru's budget is 3-point-something trillion. Our GDP is $103 billion. Our debt is about 6.7 trillion. Budget, GDP doubled in just 8 years. Yes, debt has tripled. But what people forget is Kibaki did not have devolution to worry about. The biggest road he ever built was Thika Road, which was a 22-kilometer road and cost him about 30 billion shillings. He didn't have to implement a new constitutional dispensation. I mean, the Kibaki presidency in total was a safe presidency. Then here comes Uhuru Kenyatta, whose ideology is infrastructure. He's asked a question, and right off the bat, he answers infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. He basically was saying, look, I know I have a constitution to fund, but at the same time, I need us to move from Geshagi status to first world status.
That's right.
Yeah.
Why do you think Uhuru has been in such a rush to build infrastructure? What is causing this sense of urgency?
You know, JM, right about the time Uhuru was coming to power, Ethiopia was building an SGR from Djibouti to Addis. Tanzania was threatening to build a 2,000-kilometer SGR from Bagamoyo to its hinterlands. Look at it this way. If your neighbors are building better infrastructure around you, what do you think they're up to? Their aim is to crowd you out of business. If your traditional partners like Uganda or DRC, Burundi and Rwanda could opt to use the port of Dar es Salaam and not the port of Mombasa to ship their goods, who suffers? Who suffers? It is us. It is us Kenyans. Simple as that.
And so in the Africa Uncensored documentary, the experts paint a picture of a crisis. That because we have gone past the IMF debt to GDP ratio of 65%, then we are in the red. Please debunk that myth for us.
JM, it is one thing to say Uhuru has borrowed more than Kibaki. But it's also another thing to say Uhuru has done different to Kibaki, Moi and Jomo put together. And in truth, our economists, journalists, accountants, auditors are incapable of seeing the bigger picture, at least from what I have seen. For you to understand why Uhuru is doing what he is doing, matters infrastructure, you've got to think again like a political economist. And we say this because economists and auditors think with the rules in their heads. For example, if the IMF rule book says, oh, you are not allowed to incur more than 60% debt to GDP ratio, and we incur more than 60%, they say, oh, look, they are overborrowing. But what they fail to answer is a question, so what? A political economist views things from a holistic approach. He views things from above. He isn't part of the clutter or the fray. His work is to read economic patterns and mix the patterns with some unrelated political variables, then conjure up a theory that will inform strategy. Allow me to give some context to this. And as I'm giving context, I'll ask you to go and read an article by Jean Ventura on why the country that borrowed the most advanced the most. You see, Britain in 1815 had a debt to GDP ratio of 200%. Britain borrowed mainly for two reasons. One was to fight wars with its adversaries, and two, it was to sustain and build its industrial revolution. In fact, during World War I, the British government was forced to borrow heavily in order to finance the war. Its national debt increased from 650 million sterling pounds to 7.4 billion sterling pounds in 1919, in just 5 years. Adjusted for inflation, that's about 40 billion sterling pounds today. That's nearly 6 trillion shillings, or 6 trillion shillings. That's a national debt. That's Kenya's national debt. But Britain never defaulted on any loan. In fact, Britain finished paying off those loans. It accrued in 2015.
That's right.
Yeah.
Once again,
Yeah.
putting all of this into perspective.
Yeah.
One other thing we need to talk about is SGR.
Yeah.
Why do we need SGR?
No, Jim. Back in December 2020, last year, I decided to take the SGR from Nairobi to Mombasa. And I couldn't help but think that Kenya had for over 100 years relied on a single lane road and a snaky railway to transport labor and cargo. In fact, for the most part of my journey, the SGR truck ran side by side with the Nairobi-Mombasa highway. And I thought to myself, how can a single lane, how can a single road service an entire region? You know, to me, that's a big shame. Kenya cannot be the gateway to Eastern Central Africa when it relies on a single lane road. And that's totally unacceptable. And here is why. If we compare Kenya to the human body, the port of Mombasa is the heart. The heart needs arteries and veins to pump blood to other vitals of the human body. Now, for over 100 years, Kenya's heart, the port of Mombasa, has been pumping blood through a small pulmonary artery known as the Nairobi-Mombasa highway. Can you imagine that? Now, the port of Mombasa just doesn't service Kenya, but it services Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and the DRC. For over 100 years, over 90% of East Africa's cargo that came from the port of Mombasa was moved through a 500-kilometer single-lane highway. To put it differently, without the port of Mombasa, we would be dead. Therefore, if we borrowed a loan from China to build an extra pulmonary artery in the name of SGR to evacuate labor and capital, that was a timely decision. And that's because the port of Mombasa would have been choked by the sheer demand of cargo from within our borders, but also from without. I mean, the port of Mombasa could handle 22 million metric tons of cargo in 2013. With a growing population in Kenya, in Uganda, and the larger East African region, something had to give. You either increase the logistical supply routes and increase the port's capacity, or the port suffers cardiac arrest. And if the port suffers cardiac arrest, we need a surgeon to perform a bypass surgery to unclog the arteries. Point is simple. SGR was a necessity. At the same time as building more berths for ships to dock was also a priority.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And lastly, what of those that have had their truck businesses ruined? You know, how should they recover?
You know what, Jonathan, I actually feel for them, but I'd like to ask them a question. What happened to the postman after Gmail and Yahoo set up? They you know, he became irrelevant. What happened to the landlines after mobile phones showed up? They became irrelevant. And that's the nature of market dynamics. The introduction of faster, more efficient orders spells doom for existing, slower and less efficient orders. It is the way of nature. If your ability to adapt is compromised, then your existence is also compromised. Period.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Asante sana.